This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Gord Long. It's my pleasure to have with me this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-known and prolific writer on the web and publisher of the well-recognized and followed website of2minds.com. Welcome back, Charles.
Thank you, Gordon. Always a pleasure to be here.
Charles, I'm going to jump right in here this morning on what we agreed we were going to talk about, and that is this whole concern that both of us share on what's happening with the supply chain around the world as a result of the central bank, what the central bankers are doing and their policies of quantitative easing and zero interest rates. I have up an agenda of the subjects I want to cover this morning, but I need to stress with a lot of our first-time listeners, at any given month, sometimes Charles leads, sometimes I lead, depends on the subject areas. These are not interviews, they're a dialogue of ideas that we exchange on a monthly basis. So I'm actually going to lead here on this particular session, only because I have up a chart here. I have earlier in my career a background in supply chain, when we didn't even call it supply chain actually, Charles, but in quality and from engineering and manufacturing, and bringing in a lot of the concepts today that have been standard for 20, 25 years in many cases. ISO, total quality management, and I was involved in the Malcolm Baldrige Award to the Motorola Corporation many years back. So as we get into this, I'm going to show you some examples, Charles, of what I'm seeing, and I know you've got some. It's not that I'm complaining about any of these things, because they're going to be personal examples, though I think I would like to complain about them, but it's more my observations, having been there before, of what I see. And I suspect that I see it quite a bit different than most people. And Charles, and jump in any time here as we go along, Charles, with these slides. You know, quantitative easing, when we started quantitative easing, remember how long it's been 8 years since the financial crisis, and we're still printing we're up to printing $200 billion a month right now of liquidity that's being pumped in. Why is this going on this long? How long have we had ZIRP and quantitative easing, etc.? But the whole point of that was to bring demand forward. Now, we can debate, and that's not what this show's about, if it brought it forward, if it's still bringing it forward. But the problem is really not about demand. The problem is about supply. And when you get cheap money for a protracted period of time, that cheap money distorts supply. What you end up with very quickly is overcapacity, overproduction, too many players that are producing. And we're seeing that across the board. And then what happens is you lose pricing power. And when you lose pricing power, how do you maintain your profits? How do you maintain your margins? And that puts pressures on organization. And that's the kinds of things that we're seeing here. The pressures come at, you mentioned it too, actually, when we were preparing for this. You brought up the point of Walmart. The pressures as example that they're putting on with all of their suppliers all around the world of either get your costs down or you're not going to get a shelf space in our store. We'll go somewhere else. So if you're a supplier anywhere else, you're fighting. The distribution have really got control. They just don't give you the shelf space, or they'll go with somebody else. So I think we're all aware of those kinds of pressures. And of course, pressures that are coming up from your suppliers that are giving you products so that you can put them in your final product. But I thought what was really telling here in the last 6 weeks is what's happened at Wells Fargo and the Wells Fargo Bank. And you say, well, what does Wells Fargo have to do with a global supply chain? Well, I think it's indicative because, for those that are familiar, they've had to testify before Congress because of the amount of cheating that's going on in the organization and falsifying accounts. There's so much pressure that's being put onto the corporation and the players within it. And I think, Charles, they fired three or four numbers of thousands of people who were involved in this cheating mess, right from the senior vice president on down, of creating accounts that didn't exist. I think it's securities fraud, but that's just a personal opinion. But it's before Congress. They're appalled that this is happening, and what the conclusion is, again, the executives are putting so much pressure on people to make numbers that they're cheating. They're doing it because they can't afford to lose their job. They kind of can't lose their mortgage. They got to make college tuition. And if you're having to be asked to make impossible numbers for whatever set of reasons rather, there's a potential of cheating. And here it's going on. So you start to put this little concoction, this witch's brew together, you can start to see where the pressures that are in manufacturing. Any comments on so far, Charles, on what I'm saying? You agree with what I'm saying?
Well, Gordon, I think that this topic is extremely important, and it's very underreported because a lot of the effects you're talking about are quite subtle. Now, most of us who are consumers, we can instantly think of a half a dozen examples from our own lives that are examples of what you're talking about. But I'd like you to go through some of your personal examples because then we can all relate. But it's a very deep problem. And later on in the show, as we get into it further, I'll talk a little bit about Nokia, which, we all know Nokia used to be the major cell phone player, right? And they blew up. And because there was so much pressure on the mid-managers to perform that they started basically not telling the truth about the product's development and its development problems. And so in other words, there's even a darker side to this whole cycle that you're talking about. When you're pressured to lie and or cheat, there can't be a good result, either for the product, the consumer, or the company itself.
Precisely. Let me just jump into the examples. And again, Charles, I'm not complaining here. I am observing. And they've all happened in the last 6 weeks. If I wanted to go back farther, I could have all sorts. But it really started to hit me hard. I have a boat. I'm a sailor. My transmission went on my boat. This is an expensive proposition when your transmission goes on a boat. It's worse than a car because it's harder to get out. It takes cranes to remove these kinds of things. Anyway, the transmission had to be pulled and rebuilt. It was sent to a refurb organization who rebuilt the transmission. It was then put back in, another massive job. We get the whole boat transmission back in. I take it out for an acceptance trial because before I write the check for this project, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Worked in the shop apparently, but doesn't work. So I'm saying to the marina, I says, "What's going on here?" And he says, "It looks like something wrong with the transmission." I says, "We couldn't have broke it here in 100 yards, could we?" and so something with the transmission. So we phoned the manufacturer or the refurb and said to them, he says, "Their transmission's gone." They got mad. They said it couldn't be. We do hundreds of these. There's nothing wrong. So now we got the finger pointing going on, right? You must have broke it somehow. So the bottom line is, I said, "Okay, we'll bring the transmission up. You have a look at it." He said, "Well, if you insist, but you've done something." We had to haul it all out. More money being spent. Took it up to the people who rebuilt it. They looked at it, and the first thing that you could see the sheepish look on their face. "Yeah, there's something wrong here." And it was like, "No, you guys didn't do it. There's something." They took it apart, and what it was a $2 thrust washer had broken. And they said to me, they says, "We do hundreds of these. We've never, ever seen one break. And this was a brand new one we put in, a kit." And he says, "But we did notice it just seemed to be a little thinner than they used to be. And we didn't notice it. And it's a little bit more flexible than it used to be. We're going to really have to watch this going forward." And I'm saying, "Yeah, but I have a bill here." So the bottom line is, the refurb people completely rebuilt it for no cost. But it was a cost. You know how much money? They spent a day rebuilding it. for free the second time. The marina put it in and they had to absorb it all because they had sent it to this particular shop. They had 20 hours more of labor. So here you got people charging $95 an hour having to absorb all those costs because of this $2 part. But just think why everybody complains they're paying $95 or $100 an hour for labor. It's because they're having to absorb these kinds of problems where they're not going to do it for nothing, maybe for you, but somebody's going to pay, and it's their labor rates that are going on, right, Charles? Right. So, say, well, Gord, you just had bad luck with your transmission. Same period of time, my wife drives a Jeep Cherokee. Power steering went on it. I've never had power steering go on a relatively new product. Anyway, they had to replace it. Full day in the shop, $1,000 bill plus to replace this thing. Fine, it's replaced. My wife's out 2 hours later. She's driving the thing, and all of a sudden, the steering doesn't work. They have to tow it back to the garage. Turns out, the pump had a bad seal in it. Worked for an hour, blew, and that was it. The garage spent a whole day doing it. Did I pay for it? Nope. They had to absorb it because it was their product that was inside it. $1,000 that was a cost to me that they had to absorb, or a day's worth of labor. This is pretty expensive, isn't it? And of course, like I said with the Marine, they start to have to build this cost into the pricing for their hourly rate for other customers. We thought we'd solved all of these years ago with Six Sigma. Why are they suddenly appearing? And in both cases, they were saying to me, I could tell they were seeing a lot of this, but it was like, we haven't had that go before. And their frustration, and these are suppliers that they've had going. I don't know if you've seen any in mechanical kinds of things so far, Charles. Have you seen anything like this?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you about a brand new GE range that within a year started a gas range, the oven started lighting itself without, and it was a faulty sensor. And so, the repair guy comes out at 120 an hour. And because I'm handy, I said, well, suppose I don't want to pay $250, like basically half the price of the range to fix it within like a year. And of course, the warranty is something like even less than a year now. So he was able to tell me, show me the part, the sensor, and then tell me I could order it online and do it myself, which I did. But the average person is not probably going to be able to do that. So they're actually paying 50% more for the range because it failed.
Yeah, but you notice that warranties are shorter.
Yes.
You're having to, and now the customer pays for the warranty. It's an extra. They call it extended. Before that was all just part of the product, right?
Right.
It's how the cost structure is suddenly changing, and you didn't see these kind of problems 4 years ago or before. Maybe 25 years ago we saw they weren't here. It's only we're really seeing them accelerate now that we're into cheap money for a protracted period of time and these kinds of price pressures. I got up another couple examples I bought in electronics. So we're switching gears from mechanical components. Let's get into electronics, very sophisticated. I bought a brand new Dell notebook and put it in here. Hard disk drive went on it. Hard disk drive went. Used to have disk crashes. When I looked at when they asked me if I wanted extended warranty, I said no, because the computer will be gone. It'll be obsolete, and I'll have new technology before the disk goes because they're so standard. They really last well. Well, it turns out that the disk went and it was off warranty. The warranty was so short because I hadn't put it on extended warranty. And to replace the disk, and bring it and transfer the data was nearly half to 2/3 of what a new PC would cost. But you had to do it because you needed the data and et cetera that was on it. I bought an HP notebook that we're using as a high performance on the video processor we're doing here today. And you can remember, Charles, when we first tried it, all of a sudden we were having all sorts of problems with the internet connection.
Right.
And you and I had to reschedule what's wrong with the internet connection. Well, we probably put on the old machine and it worked perfectly. Other machine, just that one. Why? Because the NIC card, the network interface card in it, there wasn't anything wrong with it necessarily, but the compatibility issues hadn't been tested properly. And they say, oh, we'll correct it with the next release of the software. So we're now become beta test because product life cycles are getting so short they can't test it. They're buying it from other suppliers for whatever reason. They may be short-circuiting it, and here we got the product. Here we got the problem. You and I ended up wasting a lot of time, as you recall, with that. This is standard vanilla with these kinds of notebooks, right?
Right.
But Charles, it's right. It's more that it's even in the services. My wife's involved in nursing homes, and they've cut back on the nurses so much. There's so few of them, and a lot of them are now doing 2 jobs or 3 jobs. They're so frustrated that they can't deliver the services. So the cost pressures that are being forced on everybody to reduce, whether the quality in the product or the quality in the service, is we're not being any longer to deliver what we used to get. We're getting less and less for more and more in terms of cost, or the cost is the same, we're getting less. Have you ever noticed, and I'm bouncing around here for subjects to show you how broad-based this is. Have you noticed on TV now how many commercials you get versus content?
Right.
It drives me crazy. And I was watching a football game, our New England Patriots, and we now have whole discussions at commercial time because we know how long they are. Well, I started counting them. I counted 15 commercials. Now, there's some of them are pretty short, and we went to a game here because we live not far from Gillette Stadium. And what was frustrating during the game is how many times they stopped and we all stood around because it was a commercial break on TV. Right? Before they blew the whistle, we went on. Everybody's kind of standing around waiting, but you don't really realize that unless you're at the game. So we're just cutting back. We're cutting back, and it's all coming from this extended cheap money and competitiveness and competition to maintain it. Now I've got up a chart here, Charles, that I tried to demonstrate what happens, why you get into this process. When you have cheap money, the first thing you do is production ramps up. You get more and more productions going out, which makes things cheaper, but you got to sell it. The demand has got to be there. You get people chasing market share. More companies start to get into the market because barriers to entry are less because money's cheaper. More production, more players. Suddenly you lose pricing power. They're fighting on price and you got no leverage. So and then as I said earlier, we saw with Walmart, distribution starts to really dictate to you. And then when that happens, all of a sudden the next issue is, well, how do you cut your costs? How do you maintain your margins? So that's when you get into, and we're kind of talking about this, about warranties. Used to be warranties went with the products. Now every time you buy something, they say, do you want an extended warranty? Extended sounds positive, right, Charles? It's extended.
Right.
But basically, you're getting no warranty, and you're paying for what used to be part of the warranty. It was warranted for 12 or 18 months or 3 years. Now it's warranted for 90 days. You've got to buy a warranty, or maybe it's 18 months. By the way, you used to keep the product 3 years, and a warranty's a lot of money. That's money that's being pushed at you. We're not getting, the product's actually more expensive, or the same price, but you're not getting the same quality as you used to be before. And what that is a precursor to is peak profits. When you get to this end of the cycle, that tells you that they're forcing margins to such a level that they can't go any higher. And these charts here show you that profits have peaked. They're starting to roll over. Margins have already peaked, and that's why we're seeing these pressures. Cash flow has been falling for quite some time. Which is another problem, which is getting into the credit cycle, and that's what's going on here in my mind. Now, comments?
Well, Gordon, I think it's interesting that you bring up the margins and the profits rolling over because, again, this pressure to cheat or lie or push risk down the chain, do whatever you've got to make your numbers. That's what the corporate management is facing here, right? In other words, to maintain these absurdly high margins and profits, what can you do? And I think
and if you let them fall, you lose your job as a CEO. So you're at such a level, you can't say, look, we've got to have a downturn here for a few years. You're fired. They got to keep going up. And if demand is slowing, what do? Move down to a smaller house? Sell your house? Sell your 2 cars? I don't think so.
No. So let's talk about Samsung. And before the show, we were kind of discussing how Samsung, first it was a battery problem that was causing a recall. Now they've shut down production entirely, and at an expense in the billions of dollars of lost revenues and direct expenses. And we were discussing how could this happen, and you were explaining how it probably happened, which was pressure was on the battery supplier to get the product out quickly, right? And so there wasn't adequate testing. And so this, as you said, the shortened times for the production cycles and pushing the costs down, we need that battery even cheaper. So then every supplier down the line has to like cut corners.
So exactly, the product life cycles have got so short. You can't do the amount of testing that you used to do, and you've got new suppliers that are coming at you, and you're having to rely on them, and they don't have the volumes or the time to necessarily do the testing. We're actually doing the testing as customers today, and you could see what happened with Samsung. I remember years ago, I had 84% of next year's revenue still on the design board. You know what worry is all about, Charles? If one product is delayed, if you have a problem with it, or the competition beats you, you're bankrupt. So that's the pressure you're under. So you're cutting, but so you can't do the testing, which is a problem. But you've got so much cost. We all know we've been cutting labor, we've been cutting benefits, labor up costs. Your wages aren't going up. I'm seeing more and more people working 2 jobs, 3 jobs to try and make a go of it. But what's happening is the turnovers are happening in companies. People will go anywhere for another 50 cents an hour or whatever because it's such a big deal trying to make it go. So when you have turnover and we don't do the training, and we've talked about that before, you get, Susie always said to Martha, this is, well, oh, that's an example, and they knew how to do it. It wasn't written anywhere. This was their part of, they've been doing it. Well, Susie got fired and laid off, and Martha got moved over to do 2 other jobs over there, and they can't figure out why they got all these problems. One, they can't go and talk to the 2 people that used to do it. These are called white spaces. And when you get a lot of change, shortened life cycles, these creep into the system. And that's what's creeping into the system. Lack of training, too much turnover, changing suppliers, and they don't have the time to do the testing. I was in a hospital here a while ago. A friend had emergency procedure, and I was surprised that the 2 nurses, they were wearing EMO, emergency measure clothes, under their gowns. And I said to them, "Is this standard practice?" He says, "No, we just come in emergencies when they understaffed on nurses, but our full job time is, I got to go from here to it being an emergency measures a provider." And because the hospitals themselves have cut back. And then the person went on, the people I was talking to, they're running 2 jobs themselves to try and make a go of it. What kind of quality service are you getting delivered there? And we're talking about medicine. They're tired, right? This was the middle of the night, and they're about to go to work with another shift. This is the squeeze that's going on, and it shows up. And I got a chart here that shows with quality, Charles, we think we understand it, but it's an iceberg. There's so many other elements that are involved, that of costs that go in. And when you start to push at it, you can sort of hide those costs, but you don't hide it because you and I, the consumer, end up with it. We end up effectively getting a lot less for a lot more. In a healthy capitalist system, Charles, what you get is you get more for less. That's what you get. That's when you get good, healthy competition. And that's because when you have bottoms up, sound money, competition in a capitalist economy, that's what you get. What we've now got is we're getting less for more. And that's not to play on words, because we have a top-down, manipulated, over-regulated, fiat crony economy that's starting to really break the system. And you're seeing it beginning. We're in the early stages of breaking down. We'll start blaming globalism pretty soon, but it's breaking down the supply chain. And as you can see on this particular chart, it leads to bad things, further bad things. When you're steadily getting less and less for more and more, you're starting to move towards statism. Isn't that what communist states start to look like, right?
Right.
And I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just trying to say that you can see the roadmap that we're marching on when you get away from sound money and cheap money, and clearly we've distorted it with monetary malpractice for 8 years. There's a consequence for this. There's unintended consequence.
Right, right. And as you said, to repeat one of your first points, is when you can borrow money for almost nothing, then you can add to your production. Because if you still have a margin, then it makes sense to go ahead and overexpand and try to take market share by any means necessary, which means lowering the price and then lowering the quality and hoping the consumer doesn't get wind of the fact that their product has severely declined in terms of its quality. And so that's all hidden, right? I mean, you look at the product, you can't tell if what went into the oven, the range, or the laptop you just bought. You have no idea where the components come from, and of course they're globally sourced. And as we're talking about, everything is speeded up, and the suppliers are being pushed to the wall. And I mean, even 5 years ago, I remember reading in Business Week or some other financial magazine that margins for suppliers in China were around 1 or 2%. In other words, the people making the components in the iPhones and Samsungs and laptops were making 1 or 2% net profit at best. Those are razor thin. And of course, we hear stories in China where the way they do it is they just stop paying the workers. That's how they made it. The workers are in arrears. They just didn't pay the workers for 4 months, and then they closed the plant. So I think what you're talking about is the human cost of this kind of insane pressure is a lot higher than we're recognizing, and that's the real importance of this topic.
It gets no visibility because people don't see the linkage between unsound money, monetary malpractice, and extended zero interest. It's because, hey, it's great, cheap money for a mortgage on my house. Of course, look at the price of houses in any kind of city and what it takes to live in it. But it leads over a protracted period to these kinds of issues. These are symptoms of the wheels beginning to come off the car. And unless something changes, it isn't going to get any better, Charles. And then when the systems start to break down, they break down very, very quickly on this. And so that's very troubling to me. But I think that the central banks unknowingly are crippling the global supply chain right now. I really do. And I didn't mean to be complaining about the things that I'm seeing. And I challenge all of our listeners to really pay attention to things that don't work and try and figure out why. Or is this anything that's really changing? Or is it just happening to me?
No. And the thing we're talking about is, as consumers, we can't assess the quality of each of the component in our new laptop. I mean, it's in a box, and most of us don't have the ability to test a product and each component. And then that's really not our job in the first place. So as consumers, we really don't have the information necessary to sort the wheat from the chaff and say, well, I'm going to pay a little more and buy a quality product. When you pay a little more for a brand you think is higher quality, it breaks down at the same rate as the mid-level brand, because they're all using the same component.
We think if something's more expensive, it's therefore higher quality. That's a license for people to take advantage of you, isn't it? You need to, so therefore you have to depend on the place you're buying it from. They'll stand behind it, and they will if you buy an extended warranty from them. Okay, right. And because they're caught in the same thing. And even what's happening, Charles, we're in such a throwaway of all products, primarily because we're getting to short product life cycles, that you no longer repair anything. You now just replace components within it. So if you go to any of these places, and I used the marine example earlier and the automotive, they really don't know what they used to know. I really could tell that. All they know is the transmission broke. We put in a new one. I don't fix transmissions. That's not my job. There's a specialty guy that fixes transmission. I know that part's broke. They send it out. Okay, so there's a specialist over here. So everything's a replacement. The problem with just not being able to repair things and replace it, the replacement products, modules become bigger. I had a dishwasher go, and so typically it was the motor, and in the old days you just took it out and they put new windings on it and new brushes on it. With $30 or $40. They don't do that anymore. Now you have to get a motor, a impeller, a pump, a whole assembly for $350. There's no other way. You just, and it's all one unit. So that's the only way that any kind of service and repair can be a profit center. So it's not, people don't know how to repair. All you do is you do module changes today, and there's money in the module changes, and you're paying for it.
Right. And as you said, this is what I call a landfill economy. We have a landfill economy as a result of the pressures that you've described. The component that was pulled out is taken and sold to scrap, right? It's shipped to Asia and stripped down to the metal parts, and it's melted down or otherwise recycled, but at an enormous expense that adds, cost to the whole supply structure. As you said, the component's now $300 instead of $30. It only lasts a third of the life cycle of the product is shorter, and a lot of it ends up in the landfill, right? Just thrown out.
Charles, I guess we have to break now. I hope our listeners don't think we're just two whining old men. But maybe being old tells us we've also seen it where it wasn't like this. And also seen the changes that we did to implement so it wasn't, we had quality in our product, something called Six Sigma, three failures per million, and monitored very closely, and see this going away from it again, and why, and then trying to figure out why we've changed, but why it's changing. And if you haven't been through that, you wouldn't have this perspective. You just say, well, that's the way it is, and move on. But at the end of the day, the consumer is the one that's paying. We're having to work harder and harder for money that doesn't go as far, losing our purchasing power and getting less and less. Go into the supermarket today and make sure you check on the bottles. It's the same price, but there's a big hollow underneath in the bottom of the bottle so that they're actually giving you less content. You have to read the shelves, right?
Right.
Are they being devious? Yeah, well, they're trying to stay alive, right? Is that cheating? No. Buyer beware. It's broad-based. There's actually an ethical and moral discussion in here, but we'll save that for another day, because it used to be that those running companies stood for something, didn't allow it. Their brand was absolutely critical to them. They still believe brand is, as long as perception is reality, and they just worry about the perception. They don't worry about the reality of things underneath, and they can't, because the board of directors doesn't care either. Right.
They have to worry about their quarterly profit numbers. If they miss that, they're gone.
There's no bad people in this. Even at the Wells Fargo, I bet you, if we really go through it, there really all were people that are good people, but they just got into that gray area, and suddenly it was part of the culture, and nobody knew where it went bad. But when you put a light on it, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we should have known better. And that's what's broad-based. That's why leadership has to stop it, but they can't, because they're going to be fired, or their presidents or life terms of these guys is only 3 years now, and they're expendable. So
we've talked about it in the past, and I think we can summarize it: perverse incentives. And if we look, what we're really talking about is, if you take apart the entire global supply chain, there are perverse incentives at every link. It's not just, you can't fix one link; all the links are broken, and that's what we're really talking about, and that's why it's a very big problem.
Charles, we'll break. Can you tell our listeners how they could follow your writings and your work?
Please visit me at of2minds.com. And thank you very much, Gordon.
And we'll talk again next month?
Yes, absolutely.
Because you're on your way to Hawaii, aren't you?
Yeah, I have to admit that I am.
So maybe next month we're going to find out what's behind the screen, right? And it could be a big beach with sand and surf.
It's not a beach, at least a tropical tree or something.
Yeah, and I'm going to be here in New England with 2 feet or 3 feet of snow behind me. So, okay. Talk to you next month.
Okay, thank you, Gordon.
Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.